So I think I'd see a lot of familiar faces from our first meeting, but I think we'll start introducing ourselves and a few other faces. My name is Zeke Davison. I'm the COO of Summit Properties. We were here end of June and did a first public meeting where we sort of talked about the project, and we'll go over a couple of those. I want to introduce my partner, Tom Getz, who's CEO of Summit Properties.
Everybody, see you again.
And a recent add to our team, Andy Miller, originally an architect in Vermont, and left for a few years. Cut his teeth as a nonprofit developer down in North Carolina and Virginia, and has recently relocated back, and we're lucky to have him on our team.
Our new director of development. So
Exactly,
yep.
yeah. And Mike Busher, who's with TJ Boyle Associates, based out of Burlington, land planner, landscape architect, who's lead planner on this project with us. So I think, first of all, just thank you all for coming. Tonight, our hope is, we took the couple months between our first meeting and today to sort of digest what the conversations we've had, what we talked about at this meeting last time, and then the new zoning that has come out in the interim since, and tried to use that to guide the direction of our planning. For those, I just want to go quickly, I guess, through some of the things we discussed at the first meeting, just to bring everybody up to speed, and I know that some of you may not have been here at that first meeting. We really wanted to introduce the property and what we were trying to do, right? Smart growth as a principle is defined by the Vermont Natural Resources Council as land development is compact, walkable, transit accessible, with a wide range of affordability in housing options. And that is really what the opportunity at this parcel is so great. One of the few left in the town of Middlebury that is within sort of has these attributes of smart growth in town. This is just a sort of a map of structures and how it fits in, butt off acres, 5 corners here, with the village here. And again, I just want to fly through some of these. This is the proximity to, a lot of the amenities here in town, public libraries, schools, grocery shopping. Again, huge principle, core compact development pattern close to these types of amenities. These are existing bus routes, and there was somebody here at the last meeting from Tri-Valley Transit that we have not connected with that was excited about the opportunity of extending public transportation on this orange line into the neighborhood we can develop here. So again, transit oriented. These are the existing utility overlays. So the town of Middlebury water source is the blue shade, and the sewer existing service areas are the pink dots and lines. Again, being on town infrastructure is a huge advantage and a built-in benefit of building here. We sort of add access to recreational opportunities and to town's green spaces. Obviously, the TAM is a huge town attribute, and the access. We'll talk with the town and with the Means Woods trustees about access through Means Woods and how to sort of connect this downtown area and 5 corners through the property, through the neighborhood to Means Woods. Again, just too great of an opportunity not to add that connection for residents in the neighborhood, but then also for the town as a whole. So that was sort of the principles of smart growth and what makes this parcel so great. The need here, I don't think we need to convince anybody in this room of the need for housing and affordable housing specifically. Middlebury as a town has one of the highest jobs to homes ratios in the state, meaning this is one of the towns, I think it's the 5th or 6th highest level that just requires commuting into. We know anecdotally from employers, people are coming across the bridge from New York, coming from Rutland, coming from Chittenden County, just not too expensive to live here. But a huge, between the college, between the hospital, between a lot of the other economic drivers here, there's a lot of there's a lot of opportunity for employment, just not a lot of opportunity to live here if you're working here. And right before our last meeting, we had the wetlands delineated. So what you see in the darker shade of green, and it extends where those arrows are, represents a class 2 wetland, which requires the 50-foot wetland buffer. So this was our starting point. I guess it's probably sort of a good time to walk through, and I can do it on this slide, Mike. That's fine. The parcel includes the historic structure here at the corner, right off Five Corners, that I think everybody is probably familiar with. There are these outbuildings that are in disrepair and not salvageable, nor of historic value. So that the college is looking for a potential buyer and development partner in rehabilitating that. So we have development rights over the entire parcel. The college reserved the ability to sell that to a good partner that was ready to do the stewardship that building needs. The rest, we sort of are thinking of in three parts, right? There's the part here that's at the corner of Washington Street and Seminary Street, which is really separated by the wetland from the 11-acre field, right, that everybody can picture. And then there is more space up here, which would require wetland impact crossing. This is the right-of-way of the GMP power line, which is why that is carved off, not developable, but could do infrastructure. So those are sort of the three portions we're potentially thinking of it in. And this, I think we had sort of said that would represent some of that recreational connectivity that we're hoping to explore as we go a little further, an important part of this. So that was the crux of our presentation from June. Wanted to go through that as quickly as we could. The other thing that's happened since that meeting is the new zoning, which included a traditional neighborhood development PUD process, which we would be applying under. And Jen is back. If I butcher any of this quick summary, please put me in line. But the purpose is really to try to create the type of residential development that is appealing, smart growth, and these are the standards that we're going to be held to as we go through sketch plan, DRB, work with zoning.
And just so everybody's clear on the purpose of tonight, there's going to be this is the part of the process where we're voluntarily going through, want to present the project, get feedback. There's going to be a full separate public process where, this is not the one and only opportunity to provide input. This is us wanting to have this open conversation, present ideas, talk them through, before we then go to the public sketch plan, which will be a full another opportunity for everyone to chime in. So just want to make sure that folks know the reason we're here.
Yep. Thank you.
Yep.
These are some of the housing types contemplated, that are in the zoning as the types of housing types that TNDs traditionally include and are sort of examples that the town has used for the type of housing type that should be considered in the PUD. Some of the other, the new zoning is also pretty prescriptive on the types of streets, the size of the right-of-ways, the setbacks, trying to rear load garages off of alleys. So there's a lot of those planning designs that Mike can get into how we incorporate later. But these are some depictions of what you'll see as we kind of present a plan in a minute of what these types of roads look like, these types of features. Again, straight from the new Middlebury zoning regulations. This is also from the Middlebury zoning regulations. These are some of the green space. I mean, a huge piece of where we started in thinking about the design of the neighborhood will include how we incorporate green space. There are parts of the regulations that require how close every door needs to be. I think it's a 15%. 15% of the land has to be dedicated to green spaces, and these are some of the types of green spaces that the zoning regulations call out. I'll show you sort of how we're thinking about working them in a minute. And we wanted to do just a couple other examples from some recent developments in the area. These are from Shelburne, I believe. On the right, that's a 25 to 30 unit building.
Yeah.
Um,
28.
Yeah, and so these are some of the larger the structures that you'll see represented on the plan. And these are, multi-unit buildings, but just sort of good inspiration for the types of structures we're thinking about, consistent with the PUD, some that exist today built in the area. I think some of these are in South Burlington, but gives you a sense of what the housing types we'll see in footprints here may look like. That's probably a good time to stop. Have I missed anything in our overview of the last meeting, or?
No, I think the only other thing is, the architectural types that we're showing here are representative only, and then we're going to the bigger focus tonight is how we're picturing laying out this community, and then those specific architectural elements for each building, that's going to be a process that will evolve over a long period of time. So tonight is more in the vision that we're putting out, and then that we will be going forward with our first sketch plan is heavily focused on the layout, how the community interacts, the different elements of the community interact. So that focus is much more on that. And we're much farther along on that than the specific architectural elements. This was just really to give you an idea of, okay, when we show you the overall layout, these are the types of buildings and the feel of the community that we're going to be shooting for.
Both by zoning, but also the types of other example buildings that we've appreciated the design of. Yeah. Are there any? I mean, I should just say quickly if anybody wanted, if we can do a couple questions now before we jump in. Yeah.
Last time you were here, you guys mentioned that the scope of the project will be largely limited by funding, which you have yet to apply for. I was just wondering, since we've last seen you guys, Congress has passed both the infrastructure package as well as the Inflation Reduction Act, both of which seem to provide heavy investment into infrastructure. And I was wondering if you guys had investigated as to whether there might be opportunities through those new programs of the government to basically potentially vie for more funding for this project to make push it to its potential in terms of technology and whatnot.
I haven't seen that as a component of the Inflation Reduction Act. There is some in there about energy efficiency, and I know, Steve, we've exchanged some emails with the Energy Committee about trying to start looking into some of those resources that might be available, but I'm not aware of.
It's definitely early on that side for us, but we will be. I mean, that would be a process that over the next year, if that or any other resources, we'd have some lead time to apply for those, but I'm not aware of any yet, that other than maybe some of the energy efficiency.
What had just passed prior to our first meeting was some state allocations for infrastructure investment for affordable housing investment, and those, largely with ARPA money, are still going through the state's sort of ARPA vetting process, and are going to be available soon this fall for applications. And there's some limited infrastructure improvement funding in those, but that's mostly for affordable housing. And so that is what the state passed back in May before the legislature adjourned, or something we're going to be trying to take advantage of and leverage this fall. Yep. Oh, geez, sorry, yeah.
Hi, I'm just curious as to what your plan would be to make it more pedestrian bike friendly, since that's a pretty busy road. You get people going fairly fast through there.
Yeah, we'll get into that in a minute, and again, the zoning requires some, but we'll talk a little bit about how we incorporated that in as we get there. Definitely important. These are some representative examples of dense neighborhood green space utilization. Playgrounds, community gardens, central greens. Again, as we go to what is the bird's eye view, to have some of these views in mind. So I think what we should start by saying first is I kind of went over those three portions of the neighborhood. There's, the portion here west of this wetland, there's the 11-acre field, and then there's potential with a wetland crossing of further development up there. Because of some of the challenges of developing over here, plus the fate of the historic structure that's here, we have not spent much energy on the initial planning there. And this would be, assuming that a wetland crossing is possible, that would be a future phase regardless. So where we've really started our energy is here. And I think this is kind of where I want to turn it over to Mike.
Sure.
To talk a little bit about how this, this layout came to be.
So we just went through, since we saw you last, we went through a process and we started evaluating a series of different plans, different types of residential unit types, different types of amenities. On top of the green space requirements and the road sections, there's also things like the new T&D regulations don't allow really dead-end streets. You really need more of a traditional block layout. So that helped decide how things were going to move. So what we landed on were the majority of these buildings are oriented towards single-family residences that are attached. So they're not single-family houses, but there's a combination of duplexes, townhouses that are sort of individual townhouses, and we'll point that out further along. And then multifamily units, but multifamily units that don't have like common corridors. Each of the units has their own exterior entrance and exit. And then we do have a couple of the larger buildings that are more in the 30 to 40 range. I think we're calling them 36 unit buildings. So this is the layout that we have. Because of the constraints with the wetlands, we're really limited to getting, a real intensive grid layout, but we do have basically these two major roads. This one that comes in off of Seminary Street Extension, and the second one that comes off of Seminary Street Extension. This one we show it with a future crossing over the wetland and with a potential connection to another developable portion of a lot that's not part of this project scope, but keeping the interconnectivity between lots is another important aspect of traditional neighborhood design. The center focus of this project is really creating green space for every unit. So when you look at this plan, more or less every single unit has access immediately to green space. There's a central green corridor that goes down the center of the project to interconnect. These are two alleyways, here and here. So that's sort of like a business end. It's not meant for a place for people to really be walking down too much. The fronts of all of these units would face on what we call a pedestrian street. So it's not an actual physical road where vehicles travel, but it is a green space, sidewalks on each side, and then we're showing it with a series of amenities. There's a small pavilion, there's an area dedicated to a playground, there's a large community garden plot, fruiting trees, other trees, an open lawn, and then there's more of a neighborhood green, and that has some seating that we're showing on it, but we're really seeing it as a flex space. It might have a skating rink in the winter. It might have people setting up badminton or volleyball nets on it.
I've sort of been using the ability to kick a soccer ball around as the smell test for a big green. I start coaching my daughter's first grade soccer team tomorrow night, so that's on mind.
Each of these green areas are about a half acre, so they're a fairly good size for the scale of the community. And there's another little green area that would be interconnected on the other side of the road. We're also showing a trail network, so connecting over to Means Woods and the TAM, circumventing the project around the stormwater facilities. We have You know, we're trying to be responsible and let the engineers have space to do their thing too. So we're showing a series of stormwater ponds around, another trail connection. If we did this trail connection, that would have to be a boardwalk, but these would be unimproved trails that can be cross through wetland areas and buffers. So just to get to the,
And it's probably, before you go onto that, it's probably worth noting that we explored on the layout. I mean, when we started, we said we want to do a true variety of building type, from single-family detached homes to larger multifamily, and we want to do the full range of affordability, from market to deeply affordable units. The affordability, again, we will stretch as far as we can as we sort of enter the stage in the process where we are applying for the resources. On the building type, as we started to lay it out, again, we have, it's an 11-acre lot. A lot of the affordable resources really require 8 units per acre as a minimum for qualifying for affordable resources. Laying out the single-family improved lots that either get sold or we build and sell as detached single-family homes, ate up such a large amount of the acreage that it was not an efficient way to get density. And so we did a lot of tweaking, we did a lot of moving them around, what's sort of the minimum number we would want in order to really be an attribute to the neighborhood, to those homeowners, and the plan that we're starting with now is not including those. So that's, I think, worth pointing out for everybody.
I just want to make a comment. You're putting a really big load on Seminary Street Extension by having it all dumped off there.
I mean, there will be traffic studies that part of it, and I know that is always
So you're planning
concern.
to
Yeah.
have that little lot up in the, I guess, what I'd say the northeast corner. Is there any possibility of getting a right of way out to the street there so you take the load off?
It's
lined-
unlikely through those neighborhoods, that it's unlikely that there'd be able to be connectivity.
The really only way to create that connectivity is not through that lot, but instead up through here, but it would require a huge wetland crossing that I think would be unlikely to be possible. We'll certainly, through the traffic studies,
Well,
understand.
I've seen it, I come from southern Virginia, and I've seen it at Ford's Colony and at Kings Mill, where they cross basically a huge wetland area. So it can be done.
Yeah, there's places that has been done. It's definitely hard to get approvals on that. And I mean, at the end of the day, I do think that when we've seen communities like this see where the traffic studies come in, the impact of residential, the number of traffic trips from a residential community like this is not going to be as extensive as you may think that it will be. But that will be part of the public process. Then all of that is going to have to be, vetted and publicly discussed. So. The concern is understood, but it will, that will be part of the process.
and traffic studies they don't just look at the street out in front, they'll look at all the intersections that it connects to, and it'll evaluate the level of service at those intersections and whether this impacts that level of service, and if it does, whether there's improvements that are needed. So it's a very thorough process.
Yeah.
I just have one comment. It's a fairly good layout, except the east and west buildings don't take advantage of the passive solar capabilities.
Yeah, our biggest challenge, and we had a couple layouts that even had more of the, inside the gridded area sort of running north-south, and we sort of abandoned that for that reason.
There are ways of taking advantage of it in that form. Just
Yep.
keep it in mind.
Yeah, it's in mind. I think what the balance is getting in the density and the number of units while trying to do that as much as possible. Those can only front on one side, obviously, and just how the layout is working as that
So maybe
loop.
you could stagger. Yeah. But it's a little more money.
Well, honestly, these ones here, definitely good feedback, and we'll take it, especially as we start talking with the architects. But these are right up against the wetland buffers here,
Okay.
so there's really
So
no
room stagger.
room on the outside. And we even narrowed this road from some previous ones to be able to fit this type of structure. But the wetland buffer line is there,
Yeah.
and the wetland buffer line is
You
there.
do with pop-ups and such.
Yeah. Yep, no, good point. Do you guys, we have a couple, yeah, why don't we can take comments now, that's fine.
Are you talking about single-family units? The one in the first row there, are those double
Yeah, those are duplexes, yep,
duplexes?
Yep.
And then the one beyond that has 6 units in it?
yep. Sort of two-story townhouse rows as they're,
How about parking? How do you?
yep.
You have some of that on the next
Yeah.
slide.
Yeah,
right? Why don't you-
yeah.
Why don't we go through the
At least,
rest
do
of
you
the
want
des-
to make a
design
comment now,
slides?
or?
I have a quick one that you can answer in the
Sure.
email. Which of these buildings would you envision applying for 9% and when?
Yeah, great question. As soon as possible, the larger multifamily buildings, I mean, you know as we do.
Is that
One of the two Ls, but those
Yeah.
may not be Ls, those may end up being bar buildings, but, you know, one of those are 36 unit buildings. So I think those would be the best candidates, for 9%.
Can you explain what 9% are?
Yes, that's the low income housing tax credit, so the kind of the primary driver of affordable housing in the state, allocated annually once per year. So for
it's
the,
a scarce resource
Yeah.
that will be just competition for the nonprofit affordable housing developer in Madison County?
so those are every February or so, right around that time is the annual applications are due, and they're once per year and in a scarce, highly competitive resource that is one of the primary drivers for new construction affordable housing.
How high is that multi-family structure?
Three stories.
Those are 3. Yeah. And then you want to go into, you want to show the
Yeah,
planning?
yeah.
So this is a diagram just to break down the different levels of housing. So we sort of started, we're looking at a hierarchy. So we have the duplex units up front. Those would be 2 stories. They would have a single car garage in the rear. It would accommodate a second car parking outside of the garage. So 2 off-street parking spaces for each. And then we move into our townhouses. We're actually showing 2 different concepts for the townhouses. The ones on the interior of the block are rear access with their garages. And through different grading techniques, we would envision these probably out of the ground 2-3 feet on the front side, so on this side and on this side. And then through grading techniques, we would bring this alleyway down a little bit, so there would be a garage, a single car garage in the basement of the units. So it'd really be a 2-story, but the garage would be in the basement. Off the back, again, there would be room for a second car in the driveway.
And to Mike's credit, did our best to try to avoid large surface lots, large, impermeable surfaces to the extent we could.
Right, so our parking is really based on trying to accommodate parking in the structures. So these central multifamily buildings, these are 6plexes, and it's a series of flats, because there is a need for a variety of housing types. So there's 3 flats on the first floor at the ground level, and then there's 6 above that. Each of them have garages in the back, so each unit has a off-street garage. Again, enough room for a parking space outside of the garage. Each of those units would have access directly to the street or outside. And the nice thing about buildings like this is they're oriented in 3 different directions. So it orients towards this street, it orients towards the central green, and it also orients towards this pedestrian connection through the center of the neighborhood. And each of those garages would also have a direct access into the unit.
To what extent are you going to explore just using permeable pavement without stormwater?
We're not really into that design. I don't know of any project in Vermont that would be able to achieve that. There still needs, first of all, it's really dependent on the soil type. I don't think we have very sandy soils here, so that's one thing.
I wasn't sure about the
There's-
soil type.
yeah,
I did something over Lake George. So.
Right. We've done a lot of projects with subsurface soil, but this site really lends itself to, what's really being used in Vermont now is gravel wetlands. So it filters through, and it doesn't have a gravel look on top, it's all planted and vegetated. So one of the things that we did do, all these buildings are 2 stories, and and they don't really, other than the townhouses, which are a little bit lower, really don't require basements to be extruded out. The way that this project works is there's a ridge that sort of hugs right down on this side of it, and then it drops really off to either side, which is why you have the low areas with the wetlands to either spot. So we've got buildings on either side that are more dedicated to having underground parking. So these are 12-plex units. Again, every unit would have an individual exterior entrance, but the parking would be a common underground parking garage, and it would be accessed in between the buildings and out to either direction. And then we went to our larger multifamily buildings. Again, you take advantage of the existing grades, get down underneath, parking would be fully underneath, and these buildings would be 3 stories with a central elevator and common corridors to access each of the units. And just to put a little bit of a vision to each of these buildings, again, these are examples that we showed earlier. We have the townhouses, the duplexes, the 6-plex, the 12-plex, and the 36-plexes. So again, we're really trying to envision architecture that orients different directions, that really brings in a pedestrian scale, that allows people to have direct access to all the different green spaces that we've been creating. So,
How
yeah.
far are the buildings set off the road?
The buildings are typically between 10 to 20 feet off the road. That's including, well,
That means that the person living across the street from there, if they're going to have this big building to look at.
so when I say 10 to 20 feet, that's 10 to 20 feet off of the back of the right-of-way. So we're talking a total spacing of over 100 feet. But again, most of these buildings are facing large green areas. So there's actually not too many locations where the buildings are directly facing one another.
Well, no, I'm not talking about, I'm talking about the people who live across the road from this housing project.
Across seminaries.
Across Seminary?
Yeah.
So
Oh.
there is actually a larger setback along Seminary Street itself.
So what is it?
I believe it's more in the 30-foot area. So this diagram is, again, we're really emphasizing the pedestrian circulation and access through the site. This is the existing sidewalk in the area comes right down the south side of Seminary Street extension back towards town. And we'd really emphasize this interior circulation, and we're really trying to make features out of both of the green areas. We'd have our typical sidewalks along the roadways. Eventually, it would probably connect into future development across the wetland. And then again, we're trying to emphasize interconnectivity with other recreation and trail networks in Middlebury. So-
Howard, I think this was sort of the diagram I was punting to when you asked your question. It's obviously the main roads will be sidewalked, and have that central core, and then sidewalked around, the sort of front stoop that looks to these green spaces off each of those.
Would you add a sidewalk across the street from you? Because right now there's a gap.
Here, you
Yeah,
mean?
we-
No, where that little other yellow line is.
Yeah, so.
Yeah,
You would create a sidewalk.
it'll be a conversation with the
Would-
town that
would
we've
you
already
not-
started.
Would you
Yeah.
not have a sidewalk on the same side as the development, because otherwise you're requiring people to cross a very busy street?
We've brought that up with the town, and it's something we're definitely exploring. Yeah.
What's your preference?
Both, honestly, yeah. I think our preference would be not to, though they would still, I mean, if you wanted to get to the co-op or to the, go all that sort of economic core, you'd have to cross at 5 corners, which is where traffic is slower, I guess. So if feasible, I think we would love to have that pedestrian access on that side. It's,
On
you
the
guys,
same
you-
side?
yeah, but
Yeah.
the,
And can you point out the additional potential one with the TAM connectivity, which would be an ideal?
Well,
Yeah, I
before-
mean, if we can-
Before you move to that, like when you talk about feasibility and talking to the town, it's not like the town's telling you you can't put a sidewalk there.
Can you explain to her about the ledge rock and the pinch points?
A lot of ledge rock, a lot of pinch points. It's town land, so to the extent we say we're talking to the town, it's not that the town is against it, but it takes more
Yeah.
coordination. I don't want to promise that, but this is a tough geography, and this is an existing sidewalk.
Yeah, I'm just imagining, this will house a lot of families with children.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a very busy street, and even though the speed limit slows down,
Yeah.
cars don't.
I would imagine that this would be a location that could possibly be looked at for the crossing lights. You see them in other communities. I don't know if there's any there must be some in Middlebury.
we know
I
about
can't think of it right offhand, where you press a button and it turns on strobes with it's basically a crossing area.
And the other thing that, if we're able to, we talked about sort of recreational and nature trails. If we're able to make this crossing the only way to cross a wetland without making an impact is, with a boardwalk or something like that. It would be really nice to be able to, as we think more about what's going to happen here, we're sort of putting in planning for having that crossing there and where that connectivity could then come here. The more we can do off the road.
That could get us to the corner potentially,
Yeah.
is a potential pedestrian connectivity.
Yep. Yeah, Nancy.
While we're just talking connectivity, I'll take this off this.
I would like to plant the seed of having the discussion with the town to have a roundabout at the Five Corners, which is basically, it has a start already, and the amount of traffic that comes in off of Washington Street Extension, the Seminary Street Extension is huge, and the roundabout works. We are very convinced in this town that it works, and I just would like to really strongly suggest that you follow through on that, to look into that. Thank you.
Yes, Nancy. Yeah. John? Yeah.
Thanks. Regarding concerns about traffic on Seminary and speed, I would assume, and this is probably conjunction with the town, that there would be traffic coming along that street with this much more residential, quantity of residences, whether it's bump outs, it's now just pretty much straight and nothing to slow vehicles in terms of how it's structured. So I'm assuming that would be very desirable and something to try to do in conjunction with the town to acknowledge the increase in the kind of use you want, pedestrian, families, and vehicles.
I would definitely envision a streetscape upgrade along this project for sure. That in itself could help. Bringing street trees out to the edge is calming. To create that vertical element. It's a visual cue to people to slow down. There are a lot of elements that can be implemented to help with traffic calming.
That's a good point, though, John.
Yeah. I live right at that intersection, and I've been there for 30 years, and they tried to slow traffic down for 30 years, and it has not happened. Has there been any discussion of putting a stop sign now?
Do you mean at not at Five Corners, you mean at Valley View?
Yep.
Yeah. No, I mean, we're just at the early stages of thinking about how traffic will affect, it'll matter, density, and, yeah.
From my perspective, of living there for 30 years, that's the only thing that's gonna slow down traffic through there. And putting 3 intersections within 500 feet is gonna create deadly accidents. I can guarantee it.
Yeah.
I live 3 houses up, he's right. No, I won't say Bill's always right, but having stops or signs is gonna be the only way. The other thing too, we should consider also is, or who's going to consider, whether it's the town or this project, sidewalk needs to go out to the, woods and out that far in Battelle somehow, either on Seminary Street, on a continuation, or over on that side of the wetlands. So, and while we're on it, we need a little more mowing of the poison parsnip.
Before it goes to seed.
I think everybody will agree with you on that, yeah.
I'll just move it along to the next slide because I think this is the last one. But this just emphasizes the greens.
Hold on, Mike, Dad, did you want to ask one question now?
Oh, sorry, no, go ahead and
Oh,
finish.
okay,
Is
sorry.
this-
Sorry, I didn't.
Yeah, I was blocking.
This is a timeline question, and it's been addressed, sorry.
No, that's a good question. Let's do it in
Yeah.
a sec.
I
Yeah.
live across the street from there.
Yep.
And so I'm really interested, especially since what we've been living with this summer, which is much smaller, but is still a lower quality of life. What that's going to be, how long, what the, is it going from seminary back in terms of construction, or is it all going to be essentially simultaneous? Do you have a timeline? I know it's meant to start next summer, but, you know, what happens to my life in that time?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, neighbor impact is something we consider and will minimize to the extent possible. I hear you on that one. If we can be beginning infrastructure by the end of next summer, that would be it's an aggressive timeline. We would love to be able to do that. We would start along Seminary Street and probably phase back.
But some of that phasing would be dependent, there's gonna be sort of multiple financing mechanisms for different lots, so a little bit will be out of our control as we put applications in that, you know, there could be, like Elise was here mentioned, the 9% building. That's, you know, maybe one of the buildings in the corner, which could get developed early if all the financing comes through, or that could end up getting late. So the exact phasing on when things get built, ideally we would start in and build our way back the most efficient way to do it. But
What about tendency? Is it how built does it have to be before you welcome tenants? Or are those staggered, or owners, I suppose, are those staggered as well? I mean, all of that changes everything in terms of when it happens and how it happens.
Mm-hmm. We'd expect them to be full as they're built. So as soon as the units are constructed, we expect them to be filled.
And it would be phased moving back. Again, it'll differ a little bit. I mean, the thing we definitely know and can promise is good communication with the neighbors, and that'll be an ongoing conversation for sure. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Just a question about the financing again, and do you have some sort of idea of own versus rent? And then with the financing, the 9% is one category, but the rest is not market rate, is it?
No. I mean, we'll
like a broad overview.
I mean, the traditionally the greatest amount of affordable financing has been for rentals. That's just traditionally in the state. There's some new resources for home ownership that we'll be applying to probably first, even before we were, you know, the next 9% application would be due next spring. This fall, sometime as we're going through the zoning process with the town, we're likely going to be submitting a affordable home ownership for sale application. We can't say whether we get it or not, but that would also include some modest market rate for sale homes. We've spoken with Habitat for Humanity, and one or two of those duplexes might be a really great opportunity to work with Habitat for Humanity on a really deeply affordable for sale. We've talked with Elise and ACCT on adding some shared equity. In the past, nothing is, you know, in stone there, but so we're thinking of, to the extent we can, trying to leverage all those types of resources. Traditionally,
You're going to just keep however it works out, like in terms of
we have.
you get how it works out as we go along.
Yeah, that's the goal. It's what our expertise is. It's what we're good at. It's why, you know, Midway selected us as the development partner on this, and that's what we're going to go for. Yeah. Yep. Steve.
Yeah. Shifting over to geothermal heat pumps for a second. Where have you thought about within the site planning that you've done where that would be located? I don't know enough about them to know how much, whether it needs its own dedicated space or whether it would be underneath, and what kind of infrastructure do you need to plan for should that become something that could be built out?
Yeah, we've talked with Steve in the Energy Committee about some opportunities here on efficiency and heating and cooling. It's an opportunity. It's an avenue we're exploring. If it worked, it would be under the infrastructure, the opportunity, you know, under the road in that right of way, and that's the sort of big opportunity of trying to do that from scratch. Again, hasn't been done in a neighborhood scale in the state of Vermont, so that's an open question about about that. Yeah, I mean, we're exploring it, but no guarantees. I don't want to get people's hopes up too much.
You don't need to designate a special part of the site for that, you build it in underneath.
Yeah, and there's enough, in the zoning, there's enough, green space in the right of way, that work, as far as we understand, and it's early information, that would work fine. But,
Great, thank you.
yeah, yep, yeah.
Yeah, I don't mean to be too nosy business-wise, but I'm just curious why that northeast corner isn't part of this first phase.
Up there?
Yeah.
Up top in the northeast? I think for no other reason than we're not sure if we would be granted, the wetland impact, the ability to cross. I don't,
We think maybe could get 30 units in there based ballpark, but when we go in for sketch plan in a few months, I think that there's a chance that we could have, it would likely be one 30-unit building in that section. So I wouldn't say that's out of the realm of possibilities, but in terms of sort of connectivity to the whole neighborhood, this central core is where we've put our focus right now. If we're able to do that, it would kind of stand on its own, and it could be a great, way to get more housing on this lot. So we're not saying that we will not pursue that. It's just it does stand alone a bit in terms of the overall community planning.
yeah. And we do have a walkthrough with Zapata in a few weeks, and
The
that's
wetlands
one of the
folks.
conversations. Yeah, sorry, the state wetland ecologist for Addison and Rutland, I think, and so we'll have that conversation with her. Yeah.
So while we're on the topic of the parcels that aren't clearly planned out yet, can we talk about the one that abuts Washington Street? Because you kind of alluded earlier to waiting to see what the college does with the historic, my family calls it the haunted mansion.
They're right.
It's pretty accurate.
What are
Yep.
the factors that you're considering there when you think about whether to develop it or not?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think we know that this will be phased over a lot of phases. We know that our best chance of starting soon is starting in the field. So that's really where we put our energy and focus now. The college, retains development rights or the right to sell the haunted mansion. John, please don't call it that in the Addison Independent. But and so depending on the buyer they get, there's some flexibility that can be available to add more land. If they're able to sell it, it's an opportunity for I can't speak for the college, but to reinvest in the affordable housing component of this. So you don't get the density and the initial impact that you can get focusing here first. And this is all, that's all ledge, the wetland pushes up to the bottom. So it's just a lot. This is a cleaner slate to work with and an easier project to get started. I do think we'll do something here. We're not far enough in planning to present something tonight.
We have to defer a little bit to Middlebury at how that initial house and then how much land around it would take up so that we can then, but before we were able to dive into some more detailed planning, we're trying to give them a little more time to discern a good use for the house.
Yeah, Jen.
Oh, you were gonna say something.
I was just going to say, I don't think we'd sort of discussed this slide, but this sort of emphasizes the green space, conserved area that is the wetland, and the community green space that we've built into the plan. I figured I would make that comment before we got sidetracked, which I hope we do.
Yeah, I was just about to say, are you taking comments on the layout, or did you have one more slide left? That was the last slide.
That's it.
That's the last
That's
slide.
the last slide. No, we would love.
I feel like, since the primary purpose of this meeting is input, that's the thing you could probably most use our input on right now, because surely traffic is going to be gone over with a fine-tooth comb when you get to the DRB, and that wetlands is still being worked out. So, I have a question and then I have a comment. So the first question is, are there any other site constraints that you're still working out, like wetlands or ledge, anything that could change how we're seeing the roads lay out?
Yeah, we've done a preliminary soils test and boring for the depth of the ledge. So they've done that. We've sort of gotten the preliminary report, but we don't have the write-up. So that can affect our ability to do underground parking at certain areas, install certain utilities. So that is a variable still. we're starting to do some of the initial estimating on the infrastructure costs, and so there's still things that may change before we come to your office and sketch planning, but I
And
think
even the roads could look a little different than what we're seeing tonight at the end.
Right.
Yeah.
The stormwater ponds have not,
Oh, yeah.
these have not been, these, a civil engineer is going to work with very in detail to make sure that they're most efficient and the right number. I think Mike would say we've gone conservative, so more than we think we'll need, so that is a likely change. I can almost guarantee that this won't be the exact layout or number of stormwater ponds, and so that could end up being more green space, could end up being another lot. It just depends on so that'll be an important process we'll be going through next.
Okay, it's good for us to know that, so we know
Yep.
like where we're at in the process.
Yeah.
So then here's my comment, and forgive me if this is not something you wanted like to get input on tonight, but I'm
Right.
selfishly I would love to get input from people in the room on
Yeah.
this thing. So it seems like from listening to Michael's presentation, it seems like one of the governing concepts here was that these buildings would front on green space as much as possible. So another way to do it is to have these buildings front on the public right-of-way, the sidewalk, the streets as much as possible. And I'm just, in my mind, and Katie, I would love to get your input on this too. In my mind, it just seems like I'm always trained to think that way, right? Like subdivisions, developments being like outward-looking, and this subdivision is very inward-looking. This development is inward-looking. You know what I mean? Like it just feels like if you showed up as a stranger driving on this road, you would see kind of like a lot of like the sides of houses or the backs of houses, but it feels like it's being mostly created for the people who already live there.
Actually, that's not what we're trying to do. We're like, so one of the aspects here is that, really upgrading Seminary Street with the streetscape. This is all the units along Seminary Street directly access Seminary Street. And even though most of the units also touch green space, but there's definitely an emphasis on the streetscape. So all these streets, taking the end unit on the townhouses, so it just doesn't address the green in front of it, but so it also addresses the street. So yes, that's a very conscious thing to make sure that these units do address the street.
Because every one of those does address the street, right? This was definitely an important topic.
How did I address the street?
Do you have that?
I know what I'd like that to mean.
Yes.
So for instance, these sixplex units that all have individual entrances, 2 of those units access off the ends of the building. So there's a front porch that addresses the public sidewalk. That's another 8 feet outside off the porch.
Sure, but all that, and I don't want this to be a whole back and forth between you and me, because I'm the planner, right? So you and I can talk on the phone anytime.
Sure.
Like, I'm mostly wondering if there's a concept here that we would like to get some other people's input on.
Right.
And at the beginning of the presentation, Michael, I definitely heard you say that that was one of the, when you were putting this design together, one of the things you started with was thinking about making sure that some of this fronted on green space.
Right,
And
right,
surely in the
absolutely.
center of the development, that's what it does. It's almost like a college, quad, in terms of those units fronting on that open space. And that's all well and good. I'm not saying it's wrong. I just wonder if aesthetically that's what people are about, or if people are more about these things facing outward.
I can make a comment.
Right on.
Yeah.
So I think it's balanced. I mean, I haven't seen it till right now, but I think it's a balance of both of those things. And I think when someone then goes to choose a lot or a building, they choose the one they feel most comfortable in. In this much smaller example of the Bristol co-housing, there were some houses that were developed right on North Street to be part of that existing grid. But then there were some houses that faced in on the sort of the central green, and they had back parking, and people very specifically chose what they felt most comfortable with. And I remember hearing people saying, I don't want to be out by this North Street, I want to be back in here. So it seems to me that there's a balance, because I think it looks like they're all, if they're not on a street, a vehicle street, they're on a, as you called it, a people street, or
a pedestrian
pathway
street
that people would need to, or residents would need to walk on to get to their car or to get somewhere.
So you're saying, I'm hearing you saying that you would like to see a balance.
It is, I think it is balanced.
Well, this is a concept plan, so I'm
Well, I
asking
think the
that,
concept plan is balanced.
so you like, of course, you like the Bristol co-housing feel of the
that was
home
balanced,
sort of
yeah.
on the green. I think a lot of people like how Bristol co-housing looks.
But there are houses that are right on North Street. They
Mhm.
face onto North Street.
Yep, true,
So-
right.
there's the main units, actually, most of them. So I think this has simpler.
Hey, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I think if you're a parent of small children, you're gonna want less street emphasis and more green space emphasis. I don't think there's any question about it. It would be safer. To me, it looks like there are a lot of streets there, all for the sake of the car. And I assume in America, we expect everybody to get anywhere they wanna go by car, but hopefully that'll change. And this would be a good way to prompt the change. So a question might be, where are the bicycle racks gonna be? And where are the byways gonna be where you don't have to go on the street if you're a kid biking to school? I mean, I don't think it's fair to have so much emphasis on street this and street that. I'm not trying to.
I mean, you're
insult
creating
you.
a new neighborhood, and as the planner, I'm really concerned about how this neighborhood fits in with other neighborhoods. Clearly, these wetlands that create a horseshoe ring all around everything create a constraint that you can't really cross too easily with the road.
Well, not to be rude about it, but
I
I
hope
think
not.
comparing it to existing neighborhoods isn't a fair thing to do, because I think a lot of existing neighborhoods are unsafe for kids. So the more you get away from those kind of neighborhoods, the better. If this is a self-contained place that's safe for kids, great. Why do we have to think about cars all the time?
So that's your opinion, that's super
Yeah, that's my
helpful.
opinion.
Is there anybody else that has input on that? I mean,
I would just suggest that for delivery of services, of UPS, FedEx, trying to find something that's on the inner part of the green space, or the home for delivery, or you have a plumber or whatever, anybody who might need. I mean, I think just all of the different services that people would expect, it would be difficult to deliver if you just have one loop and everything focused on the inside.
Once you're kind of set with what the plan is, you should do a security analysis and a climate analysis, drainage, sun, solar, wind,
Yep. Yeah.
kick the tires.
Yep, definitely. There was hand back here.
I'm gonna go back to the parking question, and it ties in with an energy question, but it's also a planning piece, because when I look at this, I actually see a lot of paving and wonder, how programmatic it is that everybody has a garage, or most people have a garage. Is that, is that a requirement of the project? And I certainly appreciate getting cars out of view, but when you put garages underneath, you're creating all kinds of thermal issues with those buildings. So that becomes really challenging construction compared to slab on grade.
And I would say that the most of the stuff in the middle we're anticipating slab on grade. The TND is fairly prescriptive for parking spots. With Vermont winters, I know that enclosed parking is a bonus in affordable or market rate housing. With the TND, the sort of rear loading was important as we talk about the streetscape. You don't want the streetscape to be, a bunch of loading garages. We did try to minimize those type, the alleys that are in the TND that are used for that rear loading. And, I think this incorporates street parking on one side. Right. For those, through the major loop.
I think our total unit count is 147 units right now on this inner loop. If we were doing this back in the 80s, that would mean we would have a 350 car parking lot somewhere here. There are no parking lots on this project, and one of the ways that we're able to do that is not just through. So these center units all have and included one-car garage with a potential second car out in the driveway. All these other buildings we're looking at is having one car per unit underneath the buildings and probably utilizing mostly street parking for whatever additional parking is necessary. So it's really tries to de-emphasize it. Another thing you're not going to see in the streetscapes is these units over here are the only units that have a garage that actually faces the street, that have curb cuts. So you're going to have very clean edges along your street. So there's going to be parallel parking all along this portion of the road that will serve all the guests for the units on the interior, and it also serves secondary parking for the unit, the buildings on the outside. So that was, it is, the streetscape is a big emphasis in the project.
The streetscape is nice, like, kudos to you guys for doing that, like, it's not easy to provide that underground parking in those garages in the back, like, I just have to throw that in, not that anybody cares what I have to say, but I have to commend you on going the extra mile there, and not just creating a bunch of surface parking. Well done.
What is the requirement, Jen? Is it one space per unit?
Oh, I don't do zoning quiz questions in meetings like this.
If I remember correctly, it's one for the first bedroom and a quarter for each bedroom after that.
Okay.
Don't quote me.
That's all right.
We can fact check that later. It's in the TND, so yeah.
Most families come with 2 cars. So what are you gonna do with this extra car?
So we're finding with the multifamily buildings that that's actually not the case.
Our average, yeah, because we have pretty extensive data from our portfolio. So for those like the multifamily rentals, it's more like, especially on the mixed income, more like 0.8, 0.9 cars per unit.
But you're still gonna have extra cars.
Right, so we are accommodating extra cars through street parking.
And as Mike said, on the ones on the inside that rear load into those garage, there's space for one car in the garage and one space outside of the garage in that driveway. So each of those have that built-in space for 2.
I'm just gonna shoot this out there. If I'm driving by this place, I want it to look like every other neighborhood. But you got that great big, what is it, 36 unit building right up front, right on the street. It's not gonna look like a normal neighborhood.
I think, but that's not going to look like it's not going to look like the 4-story flat roof, like multifamily building that, I mean, we have a few examples of what that building might look like. It will not look exactly like, the other buildings in the neighborhood right now. It will be a change, but we also, we will have a residential feel to it, but yes, the scale and scope, it is going to
And then
change.
also for people living across the street,
Yep.
it could be increased noise. All your windows are gonna open, right?
Yeah, and we've done a lot of multifamily communities and built these right in the center of neighborhoods, and we certainly don't anticipate that there's going to be a large noise impact across the street or even to the neighbors.
Along with the added cars and everything else.
Yeah, just from our experience developing these types of communities and these types of buildings, I think that because we have to be aware of that within our own neighborhood too. That if noise, if these buildings were right on top of each other or built with poor quality, poorly insulated, so you have those types, it'd be a big problem in the buildings. It'd be a big problem in the neighborhood. So it's definitely something that we are aware of.
Anyway, I'm just saying that they're being right on the street there. It'd be nice if that multi-family unit was somewhere in the back. Like the other multi-family.
Yep. I hear you on that. Yep. Sorry, you've had your hand up for a while.
Do you envision the streets and sidewalks part of this to be built to town specs, that the town would take them over for maintenance and service? Or are you envisioning this more like a self-sustaining community that does like a homeowner thing where sidewalk, road maintenance is handled by the community?
It's a conversation we started with DPW. We're going to make sure that we build the roads to town specs. The hope to be at least the main road turned over to the town. There will still have to be an HOA for green spaces, to some extent for sidewalks. We'll
Maybe the alleys.
Maybe the alleys, right? Exactly.
The central loop would definitely be built to town specs, and
yeah, yep.
So there has been situations in the town where neighborhoods have been built and they haven't been made to specs, and then they ask the town to take it over and we can't because it's not built to specs.
Yes.
So as long as you know that.
Yes.
And that does, I'm sure you are more aware than anyone, add additional cost to the project. The concern I have, if you are building it to town specs and asking the town to take over services and providing street parking, in the wintertime from, November 1st to April, whenever, April 15th, maybe, I have to go look at the sign. There is no street parking allowed. So you can't ask people to plan on that street parking if the town is maintaining those roads in the winter
Yeah,
seasons.
that's a good point.
So
Good
just
planning
keep
point.
that in mind.
Yeah.
It would be great, so I'm Heather Seeley, I'm on the select board, I also chair the infrastructure committee, so infrastructure is what I think about, so bear with me. It would be great at some point to have an idea of total sidewalk and road maintenance that would eventually be added to the town's infrastructure for maintenance. Only reason I ask is, because one thing I think about is at what point do we exceed our current equipment and personnel? Like, and I don't know when that is, so it's just something I think about, like, when this is fully 100% online, does that push us into a situation where we need more personnel and more equipment? And if it does, we should anticipate that and get that in our budgeting sooner rather than later.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. It's true for, water usage, it's true for septic, it's true for, all the impacts this will have on.
Water and sewer, I'm not so concerned about because we're already working on sewer plant
Yep.
upgrades. We're already working on, water, more, just like street sidewalks,
Okay. Yep.
So how about next time you guys meet with myself and Dan, and we already have met, we make sure Heather comes to that meeting
Yeah.
too, in
Yeah.
case she has.
That'd be really
concerns.
helpful.
Okay,
Great.
good.
Yeah, thanks.
Well, as a sideline to that, it'd just be really interesting to have as a data point the amount of real estate taxes that are going to the town from this project. I mean, I'm sure it's a significant amount. And I don't think it's fair to talk about all the negatives about it without saying, here's what this project is going to contribute
And it will be
to the
significant.
economy
Yeah.
of the area.
There's
I hope I didn't sound negative.
I hope I
Not at
didn't-
all. No, I thought it was a great comment.
From a budget, capital improvement, equipment, plow trucks, plow drivers, road, sidewalk maintenance vehicles. It takes the town a few years to plan out those things, and if these type of developments push us in a position where we need additional resources, the sooner we can plan for them, the more successful we generally are. And that's the only reason I'm thinking about it, so.
Great, no, thank you. Yeah. But Anna, I like your point as well.
Do we have the room to 6:30?
I'm
Technically,
sorry,
or-
I didn't mean to say you were
Oh,
negative.
yeah.
Just some people tend to think about, oh, this is gonna cost, this is gonna make a difference in the town on the negative side. There's also a plus side, that's all I'm saying.
We're holding people 10 minutes after we promised we would. I think we're happy to stay unless the town needs to evict us or anything.
Yeah, that's fine, I can stick around.
Why don't we do a few more questions? Yeah.
I assume that you're making the town specs, that also includes making sure that the fire trucks can be back on
Yeah.
Yep.
That's what the town specs.
them.
Yeah. Yep.
And this is a new zoning element into the regulations, so, I've worked in other towns where they have to actually look at things like, do we look at different plowing equipment for these types of roads? And I believe the road standards, the sections are a little bit different than what.
Yeah, it goes without saying, that's all the kind of stuff that we go over. You're gonna go over that with me, and I'm gonna make sure I run that past, Chief Shaw, Chief Hanley. It's gonna probably go through infrastructure committee before it goes to the DRB, and then they're gonna pull it apart with a fine tooth comb, right, Gary? So, a lot of eyes will be on it. Yeah.
Not a deal.
Couple more questions? Anybody? Yeah, here.
This northeast lot up there, who rules on that? You said, you murmured something about the college still had some say on that.
On the northeast
Yeah.
portion, no, that's really going to be about the state's wetland ecologist.
Act 250.
Yep, Act 250 as well, but we'll have to apply to the
Yeah, wetlands impact permit.
Yeah, it's Zapata Courage is the local wetlands ecologist for the state, and we have a walkthrough with her in a couple weeks, so.
They'll need to have what's called a conditional use permit. It's unlikely that there would be a denial because typically if there's land that you can't access otherwise, they look at how you can access that. And it also comes down to a financial determination of, does it make sense to cross this wetland? Because wetland crossings are not cheap.
And we did try to, if that were a future phase, this would be stubbed off, and we're trying to do it at the thinnest piece of the wetland, so to have the least wetland impact, of course. Yeah. Anything else?
And just to re-emphasize, this is a conceptual plan. This is sort of testing theories, looking at densities. It's going to go through 3 phases. It'll go through sketch plan, preliminary, final, through the town review process. It's going to evolve. It's going to change. It's going to be refined. But I think Summit just wanted to get out here and show what the idea is and give a flavor of the direction that the project is moving.
Really appreciate everybody coming out for 2 meetings. I mean, it's the public input has been fantastic. It's very much appreciated in this process. And
Would you ever consider going to a 4-story on those buildings?
I don't think right now that a 4-story building would even be permitted here.
Yeah.
I would,
I'm still wanting to
other than the
back
fact
those.
that you're a neighbor from across the street, I would certainly say, no way.
We
but-
gotta max this. Middlebury needs housing so bad.
If zoning's the only thing holding you back, then I can check it, if zoning is the one to blame for this.
So that's what I'm saying. The other one is people been wanting to do tiny homes. Is there, maybe doing one of those corners and putting in tiny homes, someplace to land that. So, I don't know. But we just need housing.
Yeah, I hear you on that. I appreciate that. Yeah.
So that's why I'm like, well, it's either, it took this long, 20-some odd years to finally get us on this project. Before we tear up another meadow, let's max it. Yes.
Yep. Appreciate that.
Yep. We wanted to maximize the resources we can to build affordable housing from the state, federal resources. We want to create a really legacy neighborhood that we're going to be proud of for a long, long time. Something that's a huge asset to the town, but really makes as big of a dent. We have this opportunity, makes as big of a dent into the affordable housing crisis and the housing crisis generally as we can. So all of those are balanced. Yeah. Well, we'll let you go. I'll wait and take to that if you don't mind.
Everybody's welcome to stay.
Yeah, thank you guys all very much. Yeah.